And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate all of you for joining us here on a Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, anyway. It's been a crazy day as far as trades, that kind of thing. We saw last night the Nerlens Noel deal go down between the Knicks and the Detroit Pistons. That freed up some cap space to allow the Knicks to be able to land Jalen Brunson. Sorry, Mavericks fans, I don't believe you're going to be able to retain him. It also seems like Jalen Brunson is going to at least take a meeting to hear what the Miami Heat have to say. So we'll see what ends up happening there. See, we've already got a couple of comments on our video before we even started anyway. I do agree with you, James. I don't understand the reasoning behind the Spurs thinking, but let's see if I can at least make a case for why they would do such a move. Sure, they're not a winning team. Dejounte Murray is by far their best player. They really need to look towards the future. They got a lot of good young pieces, but not really a solid team yet. We saw that they weren't able to make any deep playoff run, that kind of thing this past year, of course. And they haven't been able to do so for a couple of years now. Dejounte Murray was the best player on those teams. And so maybe that's the reasoning why. Maybe they didn't think they could build around a guy like Dejounte Murray as their number one star. I could make that case, and that at least makes some sense to me. The other side that could make some sense as well is just the package that they're going to be getting. So the trade itself is Dejounte Murray goes to the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for Danilo Gallinari, expiring contract. It literally has no value other than salary matching purposes for this trade anyway. The first round pick that the Atlanta Hawks got from the Cam Reddish deal. So kind of plug in Cam Reddish and kind of see the value of that pick anyway. The Hornets seem to balance around that 7, 8, 9, 10 seed in the East, so that pick will probably fall in that range as well. The two unprotected picks are the biggest part of this trade. The unprotected pick in 2025 and the unprotected pick in 2027 are probably the most important factor as to why the San Antonio Spurs decided to pull the trigger on this move. Say things don't work out in Atlanta, and Atlanta in 2 or 3 years is looking like the Brooklyn Nets, where they're going to either have to push all their chips to the middle and then just go to the tank the final few years. If that does end up happening, then those picks are going to be really high picks in the lottery. If things do work out, that's the risk you take with an unprotected pick. Maybe it's going to be in the 20s, and this trade doesn't look so good in a few years. As it looks right now, I believe that the trade probably works out a little bit better than what the Spurs might have hoped for. Trae Young is not a defensive player at all, literally is a negative on the defensive end of the floor, one of the worst defenders in the league. Adding a guy like Dejounte Murray to take those matchups and allow Trae Young to kind of hide on the worst offensive player of the opposing team, that'll certainly help things out. The one surprising thing about this trade is that they did not include Jon Collins. Jon Collins, I thought, was probably going to have to go in this trade and be able to, along with a couple of other picks, go to San Antonio. But maybe the unprotected picks were the kind of the sticking point. San Antonio would rather take the risk of going for an unprotected pick rather than taking on the salary and long-term contract of a guy like Jon Collins with protected picks. That could also make some sense for you. The last thing in this trade, anyway, is going to be a first-round pick swap in 2026. So that 25, 26, 27 range is where the Spurs are hoping to cash in on this trade. That tells you their timeline as to where they think they'll be very good and competitive again. So kind of keep your eyes out for the Spurs to kind of become that team like the Detroit Pistons have been the past couple of years. The Oklahoma City Thunder have been basically since they lost Kevin Durant. To kind of take on bad salary for better for draft picks, that kind of thing, and then build this thing from the ground up. You saw in my previous video, I have a lot of faith in young players like Keldon Johnson. He just kind of bounced off the screen, just jumped all the way over the. He was great. We saw in the regular season finale against the Dallas Mavericks, where Dallas was trying to lock up the 3 seed. If they had won and Golden State had lost, they would have had Game 7 at their place instead of Golden State having it at theirs. That would have been very interesting if something like that had happened. Playoff matchups also would have been a little bit different. So maybe the Warriors do or don't get to the finals if they were the 4 seed. But things that happened as they did. But for the Spurs, they got a lot of good young players that they now need to see if they have any hidden gems there. They do have a young point guard already in house as well. A couple of 3-and-D type wing players. Players like Jakob Poeltl I expect to be traded now. Doug McDermott I expect to be traded as well. That $13 million contract is a little bit pricey for teams that are cash strapped right now anyway. But for his shooting ability, he's too good of a player to be on a rebuilding club. But I agree with you, Kent, as well. It's going to be a crazy free agency period. We're not even to free agency yet. We are literally just getting all the options done today and seeing which players are even going to be available when free agency happens. And we're already getting this many moves leading up to free agency. That tells you free agency isn't going to be the biggest thing. It's going to be the trades around that are going to be the biggest story around free agency. Biggest free agents on the board this year: Zach LaVine, Jalen Brunson, DeAndre Ayton, Miles Bridges. None of those players are billboard stars, that kind of thing. They need a 1A in front of them to really make things go. Sorry, Chicago Bulls fans. I just don't think Zach LaVine is good enough to be able to elevate you to an Eastern Conference Finals or an NBA Finals appearance. But he's probably the best of the group. We saw James Harden opt out of his contract for $47 million anyway. I fully expect him to re-sign with the Philadelphia 76ers. That's why I didn't include him in that list. Bradley Beal, I also would be on this list as well, but I fully expect him to go back to the Washington Wizards. Both of those guys are more looking to secure long-term, big money, max-level contracts, and they aren't able to do so if they opt in. They run the risk of having injury and having the Kevin Durant issues. Kevin Durant was such a good player. The Nets were willing to pay him for an entire year about $40 million just to sit on the end of their bench, and they were going to lose that year because of Kevin Durant being out. Well, they were willing to pay it because it's Kevin Durant. None of these players are Kevin Durant. None of these players are on his level. So kind of keep that in mind when you go into free agency as to why those players shouldn't be considered as far as being moving around, because the money is what they're looking for. Now, as far as the trade of Dejounte Murray goes, he's a very good defender. Really kind of stepped into his own the last couple of years as far as an offensive weapon. His defense has always been stellar, but offensively, he's finally been able to find a rhythm. He's able to distribute the ball a lot better this year. Just kind of looking at his numbers anyway, as we kind of just go down the list. Let's take a look. All righty. Dejounte Murray. He's only been in the league for a few years now, but last year he averaged about 21 points a game, 9 assists, which in this day and age, assists are a little bit harder to come by. Ball movement is the thing, so the assists are a little bit more spread out. He, of course, was the ball-dominant guy on this team because they really didn't have too much else besides him going for him. 32% from three-point range, 46% from the field. As far as rebounds, anyway, he had about 8 rebounds a game. So kind of see him as a fills up the stat sheet on a number of different areas. Just curious how many steals he had. Looks like he was averaging 2 steals a game this year. That's very impressive. That's up for his career. Looks like he was about a 1.5 steal a game guy before that. Doesn't block a lot of shots, but that's not going to happen a bunch as a guard. But he is very long, so he is going to alter a lot of shots, force offensive players out a little bit wider, further away from the basket than they otherwise would have been. So he's a very good, long, rangy defender. Shot about 80% from the free throw line. That seems to be about on his career average anyway, over the last 3 years anyway. But the three-point shooting looks like it's been down the past couple of years, around 31, 32%. He has shot as high as 40%, and that was in his rookie year. Didn't play a lot back then, though, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. His best year from three-point range was 37%, and that was 3 years ago anyway. If he can regain that form, Atlanta would be much better for it. With Trae Young being able to handle the ball a lot more for Dejounte Murray, the ball isn't going to be in Dejounte Murray's hands all the time. I fully expect them to kind of split ball handling responsibilities when one's off the floor or the other one's on the floor running the backup squad, that kind of thing. Both of them should get their fair share of touches, but not having to have the ball in his hands as much should improve some of those catch and shoot numbers, those kinds of things as well. Just kind of looking at his two-point shot over the past couple of years, didn't shoot too horribly in his previous years anyway. He had averaged around 45%, 48% the previous 2 years. This year, career high at 50% from two-point range. So he was able to slice into the lane, be able to get the shot that he wanted. Career high in shot attempts as well, and minutes as well. So he averaged about 35 minutes a game. Probably going to have something similar with the Atlanta Hawks. Now, as far as what this means for the other players on the Hawks, most notably Jon Collins. Collins, of course, has let it be known over the past couple of years that he does not want to remain in Atlanta. He wants out. Will this trade convince him to stay? Possibly, but it's another mouth to feed for Trae Young, and Trae Young already has a hard time distributing the ball to all of his different weapons. So I don't really see that as an enticing thing for Jon Collins. I still believe he's going to want out of there. And once you trade him, you're looking to immediately replace him. So he's going to be a tough trade to find now that you held on to him in the Dejounte Murray deal. Other players that are going to be impacted by this, I mentioned Kevin Huerter in another video earlier today that he might be a trade possibility. That could very well be the case as well now. However, that contract looks very good on their books because it's not quite as big as Bogdan Bogdanovic, excuse me. But Bogdan Bogdanovic is probably the most likely to move to try to save some money along with Jon Collins. Before this trade was made, the rumors were out there that the Atlanta Hawks wanted to cut back on payroll, and that very well could be the case still. So those are the two names you want to keep an eye out for. Jon Collins, what could his market look like? Maybe a first-round pick, a protected pick. But we saw what Kristaps Porzingis went for. Didn't go for much, and they actually the Mavericks had to include a second-round pick because that contract was so high. Is Jon Collins the player that Porzingis is? No, not at his peak, but he's a lot more consistent because he's available. Availability is a lot more important nowadays in today's NBA. Because he's more available, I think he's going to be able to acquire at least a first-round pick in return for Jon Collins. Not too high of an acquisition cost. It's more going to be about a team taking on that money. Is Atlanta willing to take on a contract back? Say the Mavericks are like, hey, we want to have two good big guys. We'll trade you a first and Bertans. Are you willing to take back 2 years plus a non-guaranteed year of Bertans in order to move off of Collins? I don't think that gets it done. Bertans is literally a negative trade value right now. Think of it as $32 million hole that you're just having in your lineup. He is a good three-point shooter when he's on, but he's not worth $16 million a year. I'm sorry, Washington, when they signed him to that contract, I don't understand what they were doing. But as far as the Collins deal itself, the first-round pick would be enticing to them, but they're going to need something better than a guy like Davis Bertans back. Maybe an expiring deal like the one they just sent out in Danilo Gallinari makes some sense. But I don't think they're going to want draft picks. I think they're going to want young guys that can play a role in their front court. So kind of look at those kind of players if you're interested in trading for a Jon Collins. Now, as far as the Bogdan Bogdanovic trade, I think they're just strictly going to want to get off his money. Things didn't work out too well in Atlanta for him, either due to injury or just the circumstances around the failed sign and trade, lingering effects of that from the Milwaukee Bucks that didn't work out. Those kind of issues, along with just not exactly the performance that they were hoping for. He kind of plateaued as a player, hasn't really improved since his time in Atlanta, and some of that could be very well due to Trae Young. Trae Young does not pass the ball very well, very ball dominant. When he does pass the ball, he doesn't give his players the best opportunity to score. He's not leaving it in a place for them to be able to get the shot up easily. He's not leaving them with open shots, those kinds of things. Dejounte Murray, on the other hand, because he was so effective with the San Antonio Spurs, he drew the eyes of all 5 players on the court. He was able to spread the ball around and make those other guys look a little bit better. Trae Young still needs to find that gear in his game. I still think he's a fantastic player, and if he is able to improve at least that portion, he's never going to be a great defender. I don't think he should even be worried about that. If he can at least give 5 minutes a game of at least effort on the defensive end, that's really what you're hoping for Trae Young. But I think that's really the next big step in Trae Young's game is being able to improve as a passer. This year was kind of a letdown year for the Atlanta Hawks after going to the Eastern Conference Finals the year before. So making the move for Dejounte Murray makes some sense if they believe this is their title window right now. The last option that the Atlanta Hawks have is, of course, holding on to all of these pieces, holding on to Collins, holding on to Bogdanovic, those kinds of guys, and just making a run at it to the finals this year, see if they can finally push themselves over the hump. Winning a title in Atlanta, just one, would mean everything to that team, that franchise, that city, that state. What a move it would be if they're able to actually capture gold. Do I think they'll get there even with holding on to all these pieces? No. I think they're going to be a much better team. I think they're going to have some locker room issues if they hold on to Collins. So that's pretty much why I don't think it's going to work out this season if they keep things as they are right now. During free agency, I mentioned, or in the free agency live that we did earlier, I mentioned that they're going to need a backup point guard. This gets them a shooting guard slash point guard, so they don't really need to have a high priority on getting a high quality backup point guard. Maybe getting a guy who was in their system last year in a Delon Wright, maybe a free agent like a Tyus Jones from the Memphis Grizzlies. That kind of player might make some sense to fill in at that point guard position when those two are off the floor. Something like that makes a lot of sense if you're an Atlanta Hawks fan. Lastly, they've also been mentioned as far as trading away Collins, not only Collins but also Clint Capella. They want to get some minutes to their younger guys at the 5 position. It's not a bad contract, don't get me wrong, but I don't see a team willing to take on that salary without getting some type of incentive to do so by getting a guy like a Collins taking on more salary and possibly not giving away as much in return. Capella, in my opinion, has a neutral trade value. You're not expecting a lottery pick or anything like that. An unprotected pick is not going to happen in a trade for Clint Capella. On the flip side of this trade, just to kind of cover it one last time, the San Antonio Spurs have traded away Dejounte Murray in exchange for 2 unprotected picks, in addition to a 2023 first from Charlotte, as well as a pick swap in 2026 and the expiring contract of Danilo Gallinari. Now, that expiring contract is either one, going to be bought out by the San Antonio Spurs. I don't see Gallinari playing a game or even be suited up for a game during the season for the San Antonio Spurs, or they could flip that contract for a lengthier contract like a Davis Bertans from Dallas if they want to get off that long-term money and acquire picks for doing so. We saw that the Detroit Pistons were willing to take on Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel for the price of $6 million and 2 future second-round picks. Both of those players, though, still had positive trade value. Not much, but a little bit. But the Knicks were desperate to try to clear out cap space in order to make it the $100+ million offer to Jalen Brunson. Sounds like that offer is going to come in at 4 years and $110 million. Now that the Heat are at least going to schedule a meeting with Brunson, I wonder if the Knicks are just going to push it all the way to the max. Can you believe it? From before the season, Jalen Brunson was expected to get 4 years, $55 million. We're now expecting to get a near max contract from either the Knicks, Heat, or Mavericks. Mavericks sound like they're capped out at 4 years and $22 million per year, so you can kind of see why they've fallen behind, let alone the personal connections that the Knicks have had. But getting back to the Spurs side of the equation, the Danilo Gallinari contract is going to be another trade chip for them to be able to acquire more assets for the future. Do I expect them to be a player in free agency? No. They could go after some of the younger guys out there, like an Amir Coffey. I mentioned him in another live earlier this week. Amir Coffey played very well for the Los Angeles Clippers. He is a restricted free agent after the Clippers extended him a qualifying offer. They are a tax team. That tax bill is going to be very high. Now, Steve Ballmer, of course, is no stranger to spending money, and I don't think he's afraid to spend money, but is he willing to spend it on a guy like Amir Coffey, who's going to probably be their 10th, 11th, 12th best player on their bench? No. So if you're able to extend him a contract, say like a Christian Wood level contract, a 3-year, $10 million deal, 3-year, $8 million deal per season anyway, something like that might make a lot of sense for the Spurs. So if you're a Spurs fan, build for the future, try to get those young guys, see if you can get some more out of that youth, trade away any aging veterans that you have on your roster, and take advantage of the cap situation of other teams. That's what you have to look forward to, at least for this offseason, probably next offseason, because your next competitive window sounds like it's going to be at least 2025. Thanks, guys, for joining us here at The Upside. Remember to hit that subscribe button. It really does help us out. Appreciate all of you for joining us here at our live. If you have any questions, if you ever want to talk about any of these trades that are happening, stay tuned here to The Upside, and we'll be sure to have a video out about any of these transactions that you want to know about. Again, thank you. We appreciate all of you guys for joining us, and we'll see you shortly.